perspective. His recent book, Dui Krishna O Ekti Mahabharat, offers a nuanced interpretation of the Mahabharat. Shri Moirangthem Rajan, please join us on the dais, please. Mr. Rajan is a contemporary writer from Manipur. His novel Across the Hills, published in 2025, has been widely appreciated. He is actively associated with several literary organizations in Manipur and contributes to the growth and visibility of regional literature in contemporary contexts. Please come to the dais. And last but not least, Sri Jagannath Dash is an eminent poet, storyteller, critic, and bilingual translator with 28 publications to his credit. Please join us on the dais. He has translated several important works of Odia literature into English, helping bring regional voices to a wider readership. His work plays a vital role in bringing linguistic and cultural landscapes to the fore. May I now hand over the mic to our esteemed moderator, Shri R.S. Sarajuji.
प्रोफेसर अमृत सेन जी, मोइरांगथेम राजन जी, जगन्नाथ दास जी। विज्ञान कथा साहित्य को लेकर साहित्य अकादमी की ओर से चर्चा के लिए विषय के रूप में स्वीकार किया गया है। ये बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण बात है। वास्तव में ये विज्ञान साहित्य क्या है और विश्व में विज्ञान कथा या विज्ञान कथा साहित्य का विकास कैसे हुआ है और भारतीय भाषाओं में विज्ञान कथा साहित्य की क्या प्रासंगिकता है, किस रूप में इसका विकास हुआ है, ये कोई उपनिवेशवादी संस्कृति की देन है या स्वतंत्र रूप में क्या इस विज्ञान कथा का विकास हो रहा है। तो विज्ञान कथा कैसे लिखें, तो इसमें कहा गया है कि आगामी काल के सच को ही क्या हम विज्ञान कथा कहेंगे और असंभव की कल्पना क्या विज्ञान कथा होगी या किस रूप में आगे विज्ञान कथाएं हो सकती है। ये कुछ महत्वपूर्ण बातें हैं जिनको लेकर चर्चा करनी है। आप देख ही रहे हैं बहुत कम श्रोता इस विषय को लेकर हमारे सामने हैं। फिर भी तो जो विषय दार्शनिक धरातल पर किसी देश को आगे ले जाते हैं उसको लेकर चर्चा करने में बहुत सीमित लोग ही रहेंगे। जैसा कि बाकी विषयों को लेकर बहुत सारे वक्ता भी मिल रहे थे, लेकिन विज्ञान गल्प या साइंस फिक्शन को लेकर वक्ता भी बहुत कम मिले। तो हम कुल मिलाकर 4 लोग हैं। 15-15 मिनट हम लें तो फिर अंत में मैं कुछ बोलूँगा। तो मैं वक्ताओं को सीधे आमंत्रित करता हूँ। तो हमारे प्रथम वक्ता होंगे प्रोफेसर अमृत सेन जी। आप अंग्रेजी के प्रोफेसर हैं शांतिनिकेतन अंग्रेजी विभाग में। टैगोर अध्ययन और यात्रा वृत्तों में इनकी रुचि है। कई अनुसंधान विषयक परियोजनाएं इनके निर्देशन में हुई है। तो चीन, स्कॉटलैंड, श्रीलंका, मॉरिशस वगैरह देशों का इन्होंने भ्रमण किया है। तो आपसे अनुरोध करता हूँ कि आगामी कल का सच कैसे होगा और असंभव की कल्पना हम कैसे करेंगे, भारत में किन किन प्रभावों के अधीन तो अंग्रेजी या अन्य प्रभावों के अधीन किस रूप में विज्ञान कथा का विकास हुआ है। तो इस ओर आप पृष्ठपात करेंगे और अपनी राय देंगे। तो 15 मिनट का समय आप लीजिए, आप इधर उधर भी हो सकता है।
Thank you, Chairman Sir, and fellow panelists, and my thanks to the Sahitya Academy for giving me this chance to explore the intricacies of science fiction. As you can see, there are two things here. First and foremost is what tomorrow will look like and what role imagination plays in science fiction. These are the two rubrics within which we shall discuss. But there are also two things I need to say, because we no longer in academic parlance refer to this as science fiction only. The term used is speculative fiction, which involves not only the realm of epistemological science, as it were, but also horror, the concept of the imaginary, mythical that has been brought into science fiction. So I'll be speaking broadly about speculative fiction. There are three parts to my discussion. The first is to see how theoretically science fiction has been looked at as a genre. So what is science fiction? Second part is, what science fiction had to do with colonialism, a point that Sir was making very eloquently. And the third part is, what is science fiction in India like right now? Now, I'll be talking about a few regional literatures, but most importantly, I'll be restricting, because there are fellow panelists to talk about them, on English literature, right? On the literature written from India in English, right? Now, when we talk about science fiction, there are three, broad directions. The first was articulated by Darko Suvin. Suvin said that science fiction must have a novum, and it is a literature of cognitive estrangement, something new, a discovery that has to be talked about, and that will be estranged from contemporary society, that is different from what we are right now. Now, this was contested very significantly by Frederick Jameson, the Marxist critic, who said that science fiction is fundamentally a way of taking the temperature of a social system at a particular historical moment. So science fiction, when it imagines the fictional, is actually talking about what is wrong now, or what one wants from today. The third point that was made has been made by Julia Siebeck when she talks about science fiction as imagining alternative spaces. So spaces that we have and spaces that will come up in the future. This is something which I'll talk about very briefly when I talk about the texts. Let me talk about Indian science fiction. Very interestingly, we have Indian science fictions right from the time of colonial science coming to India. One of the first science fictions was written no other by the great scientist Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose, who was one of the greatest scientists of India during the colonial times. But science fiction as a form took root, interestingly, from Bengal, from the period 1963 to 1972, with the publication of a science fiction journal called Ashchorjo, strange. Ashchorjo is strange, which obviously all of you understand. Now, here, very important writers like Premendra Mitra of Bengal and Satyajit Roy, who is, all of you know, as one of India's greatest filmmakers. Satyajit Ray actually wrote a story which was taken by Spielberg to make his film E.T. Right? So we have a science fiction tradition coming up in 1961, which was influencing even global thinkers. Now, the protagonist of Satyajit Ray, and this is to sort of respond to Sir's question, how did it react to colonialism? The protagonist of Satyajit Ray is a man called Professor Shonku, right? And I'll talk about 3 stories that he writes in Bangla. Shonku is located in Bihar, Giridih, and he creates science with available resources. Therefore, in the first story that we are talking about, which is called Bomjatri Diary, Shonku builds a spaceship that he then takes to outer space. Interestingly, this is probably the first time that an Indian space program is being established. Very interestingly, Satyajit Ray talked about science fiction as Kalpa Vigyan, where imagination and science would meet, right? And he said that good science fiction will include more Kalpa than Vigyan, right? Now, in the next text that I'm going to talk about, it's called Professor Shonku Orobu. It's for the first time that actually Shonku is building a robot. Now, this robot can distinguish between what is truth and what is falsehood. So when an alternative German scientist builds a robot and that robot takes over that scientist, this robot, Shonku's robot, is able to identify it. Now see, what is being done here is at this point of time, Satyajit Ray is imagining the possibility of a robot actually taking over the human. Something that we are just now waking up to with AI, right? That there might be a time when AI might decide that the human being is the expendable thing in the whole universe. Right? Now, the third story, interestingly, talks about, the inventions, the 3 inventions of Shonku. One is a Miracule tablet which cures all diseases. The other is an instrument that combines the telescope and the X-ray. And the third is an annihilin gun which can vaporize anybody. These are his 3 major discoveries. But how does this Miracule tablet come from? He says that it is from his father that he got this tablet from a plant, from an Ayurvedic plant which is called Swarna Champa. And this he found from Almora, right? So interesting is 2 things. One is that Shonku is creating an Indian science which is very advanced. Second, is cooperating with German scientists, British scientists. So the spirit of cooperation and internationalism, that science is not a community which is just national, but also spread across the globe. And the third thing is he's using Indian mythology, Indian topos, Indian imaginary to create a science fiction, right? So this is how, I guess, 2 things are happening. One, pride in Indian science, belief in the Indian scientists. And secondly, an Indian science that can once take over the global scientific scenario. So this is the post-colonial response to science. What is the situation now? In Indian science fiction, I see 3 directions. The first is where Indian science fiction talks about a concept of alienation and interspecies rearrangement. The second is the formation of a surveillance society. And the third is an anxiety about environmental disaster. Let me talk about 3 authors to articulate these 3 directions. The first author whom I'm going to talk about is Vandana Singh. Vandana Singh is a professor of physics at Boston University, and she's incidentally written well upon Delhi. Now, in a story called Delhi, she talks about various women who can travel or who can meet various strands of time. So there are women who can correspond and come with each other who are from different moments of history, right? So these are tangles produced when one part of the time stream rubs up against another and the two cross for a moment. It is at this point of time that she sees the future. And this future is that of the Delhi Underground, the metro in Delhi. And she sees it later on as faces pale and unhealthy as though they have never beheld the sun. This part of Delhi is now Nichi Delhi. So there is a very clearly a division between two Delhis. One, the Delhis of the haves, which has clean air, clean water, and there is the Delhi of the have-nots, where in the future, the Delhi metro has been reduced to a place where these people have been relegated. This is one strand of Vandana Singh's fiction. The second, interestingly, is where she talks about Indra's web, right? Where Mahua, who is the character in the story, transforms a former slum into a sustainable community to rehabilitate climate refugees. You will remember that climate refugee is an issue which is coming up time and again in our fictions nowadays, especially in the fiction of Amitav Ghosh. Right. And she talks about ways, new ways in which people can communicate with plants and trees. So she refers to this as a fungal network, a secret connection between the plants of the forests, a subtle language. And this leads to the formation of a network which she calls SuryaNet, where plants and human individuals will later on communicate and cohabit. This is a kinship, she says, based on the assumption that every person has a right to exist, a right to agency. We must continuously adjust to other beings. Now, as the environmental crisis deepens, we see science fiction responding to this, because science is only about the human. What science fiction is now demanding is that the sentience of other objects and beings be also looked at. Interestingly, she then talks about the woman who became a planet. This is a fantastic story if you want to read it. This is about an old woman whose husband has retired and who has given her entire life for the family. And then she suddenly says that she now wants to leave the family and become a planet. And the husband naturally is bamboozled, and she says, now I know being a planet is good for me, right? Slowly, the husband can see insects and insecticides coming from her mouth, and they colonize his body also, and he shrieks in pain and discomfort. But the woman asks him to be a satellite which will, host these beings. Once again, the empathetic relationship between the woman and the other beings versus the man who can never tolerate this is being articulated. So a question of gender is also being brought in. Slowly, the woman floats away, leaving the husband behind. Interestingly, what is being articulated here again is the concept of the alien. We had a session on Dalit literature earlier. What Vandana Singh is asking is, who is an alien? Is it somebody who comes from a spaceship only? Or are we creating a lot of aliens within our society who have never actually belonged there? And the woman here is one such category who has always been treated as an alien. So this is where science fiction is bridging, questions of society as well. Let me quickly move on to the next author whom I would like to talk about. I had a lot of things more to say on Vandana Singh. Her fictions are really fantastic, but I don't have much time. This is another author who's based in Delhi, Samit Basu. Basu's City from Inside and Chosen Spirits talks about what kind of digital society are we going to have. This is 2030s. We have had large-scale decitizenships, voter list erasures, internet shutdowns, news censors, and data-driven home invasions. Joey, who is actually Bijoya, is now a reality controller, somebody who's akin to an influencer on his Instagram. And she, therefore, has this society that she has created where clean air and water, once again, very important in science fiction, is available only to a certain few. She now goes to Delhi's Cyber Bazaar, which was formerly Nehru Place. You remember, we have cyber goods in Nehru Place, right? Where she comes across people who resist this kind of new reality being created by corporations. And we have the character of Rohit Gupta, who is now preparing or offering packages for climate change with new disease vaccinations and with new kinds of residences offered. This kind of fiction in science fiction is now called cyberpunk, right? And we have, gadgets which are tied to the arms of every citizen, which monitor their health and which control what their thought processes are like. We are reminded once again of George Orwell's, Big Brother is watching, as it were, from his novel 1984. Interestingly, there's a new mall which has come up over a university which had once protested too much, probably referring to JNU. Right, so a new mall has been built there. Right, and what Samit Basu is talking about in the future is, it isn't the government snooping anymore, but a peak traffic cluster of corporations, cults, gangs, other algorithms watching you, measuring you, making you down for spam or death. Remember, our health data now are being all digitized and uploaded. Your future medical insurance policy premiums might be fixed on what kind of health records you have. So we are continuously being dehumanized and made subjects of data interpretation. This is the society that Samit Basu is talking about. Climate emergencies become the third kind of fiction that are being talked about. Let me talk about Varun Thomas Matthews' text, The Black Dwarfs of the Good Little Bay. This, incidentally, is a story about future Mumbai, a Mumbai which has been destroyed by floods, and therefore there has been the creation of a bombardrome, right? Bombay to bombardrome, a kind of a mansion, a huge kind of a building where people have retreated, which has been built by a corporate society, and where people are ruthlessly controlled and they cannot venture outside, right? So therefore, you have on-demand gratification of pleasures, everything and the reality that you experience is controlled, right? Therefore, and again, this society is tightly digitally and technologically controlled. So there's a virtual reality which is offered for the residents, and they cannot venture into what is reality outside, right? I would have liked to talk about Dilip Menanji here also, but I don't have the time. Another very fine science fiction writer in English. Interestingly, science fiction is percolating down also to all kinds of corners of India. We have, for example, Bhuvanesh Varicha Kallol, which is by Dr. Ranjan Garge. Unfortunately, I don't read Marathi well, so I have not been able to access this text, which is again talking about climate crisis. We have Abhishek Thamke once again, who talks about climate crisis in his own way in Marathi again. There is a Bengali very strong tradition, which is the dystopic tradition. We have anthologies by Deep Ghosh, very interesting, by the great magician P.C. Sarkar, who writes science fictions and talks about science fiction essentially as the imaginary. And we now have digital magazines. Very interestingly, I was going through a lot of these digital magazines which are now available in various languages. Now, I would like to conclude by arguing that science fiction does not merely create imaginary universes. They respond to the deep anxieties and fears of today. And therefore, just like utopian or dystopian literatures, they are born from our fears, our anxieties, and the trends that we are observing. Unfortunately, what has happened is that the readership of such science fictions, as Sir was saying, and the practitioners of such science fiction have been few and far between, probably because it has been seen as too esoteric, and secondly, is it because we actually fear what the future might hold for us? It is with these thoughts that I'd like to conclude my presentation. Once again, thanks to the Sahitya Academy for allowing me to read up on so much science fiction and present it. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू वेरी मच. बहुत ही संक्षेप में अमृत जी ने शंकु के कैरेक्टर के माध्यम से और अन्य उदाहरण के माध्यम से किस रूप में हम अपने भविष्य को वर्तमान में लाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, या वर्तमान में हम किस तरह से अपने भाई, अपनी एंग्जाइटी वगैरह को फिर आधार बनाकर भारतीयता साइंस फिक्शन को हम देते आ रहे हैं, बहुत ही स्पष्ट किया है. सो अभी मैं आगे मोइरांगथेम राजन जी जो मणिपुर के लेखक हैं, तो ये पुलिस सेवा से सेवानिवृत्त होने के बाद इनकी किताबें प्रकाशित हुई हैं, कई किताबें हैं. सो कई संस्थाओं से ये यानी पुरस्कृत भी हुए हैं, तो कई साहित्यिक सेवा संस्थाओं के भी सदस्य रहे हैं. मैं आपसे अनुरोध करता हूँ कि अब आगामी कल के सच के बारे में अपनी राय आप प्रस्तुत करें.
Esteemed moderator, respected panelists and respected audience. When I received this invitation from the Sahitya Academy, I was thinking that I would be reading a short story, because basically I have been a short story writer, though I also write poems, and one novel is due in this month. I didn't prepare anything because there was nothing to prepare, because I will not be speaking in the recent trends in Indian science fiction writing or recent trends in the worldwide stage, but I will be speaking a few words from the perspective of Manipuri literature in science fiction only. This topic is very scanty, therefore there was no need to prepare a paper or no need to prepare for long. I have just written down a few books only. Actually, science fiction arrived in Manipuri literature very, very late. It is just starting, I think. The earliest writings about science fiction comes not from the novel or not from short story, but from a radio play. a radio play titled A New World for You and I. This was written by one Sagolsem Indra Kumar. He is a radio playwright, not a novelist, but a writer for children's books. In this story, which was broadcasted by All India Radio Imphal in 1984, this was a very popular play. And this story was published in the form of a book in 2011, which was a collection of 6 radio plays. In the play, a scientist father sends his daughter and a robot into space to another planet. This planet is unnamed. In the story, we come to know that the whole episode is only a dream by the daughter. Daughter also finds out that her space companion is a humanoid computer. In the end of the story, some snacks or difficulty develops in the spacecraft, and his daughter and the robot are stranded in an unnamed planet. And his daughter wakes up and she realizes that it has been all a dream. Anyway, this has been the beginnings of science writings in Manipuri literature. Then next come Indra Kumar's second book, Thada Thabaton. Translation is like Thabaton on the moon. This was published in 2020. This is also a children's science fiction in which a girl named Thabaton goes to the moon, and the moon is personified, and their conversation begins, and they roam about from planet to planet in the whole solar system. After Indra Kumar, we have Nomaikapam Navakumar's 2 short story books. One book is titled Loktak Amasung Sinmi. English translation is Loktak and the Pigeons, published in 2017. This collection contains 2 science fiction short stories. In the story titled Nano, a man wearing nano-metafabric attire becomes totally invisible, and he starts playing pranks on other individuals. He has humorously written this story. Now Kumar has written this short story in a humorous way. The other title is called You Fox. And this is a story about an alien who came in a UFO, kidnapped a person from Earth, and after being trained, he returns to Earth and start killing terrorists on Earth. This is a very funny story, but it is meant to be a science fiction, or rather a science fantasy fiction. Another writer who attempted to write science fiction is one Prilapam Rebadi Sharma from Thoubal district, Manipur. But I think his writings are mainly in the realm of fantasy only, because Isaac Asimov says that science fiction is the study of the impact of science and technology on humanity. The impact of science and technology on humanity. And the science fiction should have a scientific background. It should have a novum. Otherwise, it may not be called a pure science fiction. The difference between science fiction, I think, science fiction and the fantasy is that science fictions are based on scientific principles. They are quite possible in the near future. They are probable imaginations. But whereas fantasies are, their assumptions are based on magic, which is not science. Therefore, writings of Revati Sharma, I think they are more rather in the realm of fantasies than in the fiction, in the science fiction category. Though I am basically a short story writer and I have been an art student throughout my student's career, I have 3 or 4 short stories which can be, I think, which can come very close to being classified as science fantasy fiction. In the first story, which I wrote around 1998 and which was published in a book in 2011, the title is Supercomputer. In the story, a powerful minister in the Imphal Valley who is involved in the corruption case is examined by a supercomputer. The minister is terrified that as the questioning goes on, the supercomputer happens to know every detail in his past life, which he doesn't want to express or talk about. Therefore, what he does is, after the questioning, after the interview is over, or questioning is over, the politician sees the supercomputer as a major threat to his political career, and therefore he declares that the supercomputer is like, it needs a major repairing, and those who are involved in running the behind the supercomputer technicians are all transferred out in the far-flung areas of the country. In the second short story, title Khut, the English translation will be The Hand. This was published in 2024. A recent collection of short stories titled Across the Hill. This may be a science fantasy fiction story. It is an allegory also. In the story, a thief finds out that his right hand is growing longer and longer, independently of his other body parts. He is terrified and he summons local medicine doctors, but they cannot cure his hand. Therefore, what he does is, he goes to an unnamed city where he consults a doctor. The doctor says that this may be due to some genetic mutation. Some genetic mutation, a negative, like malicious mutation in his DNA. The thief doesn't know what mutation is, and he doesn't understand the scientific terminologies. But the doctor opines that there is no cure for this longer hand. What he can do is, he can amputate his hand on by medical surgery. But the thief doesn't want his hand, bread-earning hand, to be cut off. But at last, the doctor consoles him that sometimes mutation happens, and mutation may be good or bad, and sometimes some mutation may be cancerous. And some people may develop longer right hands, and for some people, their left hand may be longer than the right hand. To prove his point, the doctor shows the thief his left hand, and the thief is quite surprised to see that the doctor's left hand is longer than his right hand. Later, he finds out that those people having a longer right hand are thieves like himself. And those people who are having longer left hands are like womanizers, people who have a lesser virtue, people who misbehave with women. And in the end, the thief returns to his native village where children playing on the road sees him and they shout, "Oh, look, there goes the man with the long hand." And the story ends. I think this story, though told from the perspective of an allegory, because this is an allegory, in the Manipuri tradition, having a long hand means the person has a thieving habit. He is a master of stealing. And those persons who have a left long hand means they are a womanizer. They are loose with women. In Manipuri tradition, this connotation is there. Then another story titled Hu Pambi, English translation is the poison tree. The poison tree. In this story, the narrator is surprised when one day he finds out that his friend is keeping many snakes in his house. As the story goes on, he also learns that his friend is immune to snake venoms and he treats snake bites with his own medicine. And he sees that his friend is frequently bitten by lethally poisonous snakes, but somehow he seems to be immune from the poison. But one day, the narrator finds out that his friend is not totally immune from snake poison because he had been suffering from bites from his pet cobra. The narrator is worried that his friend is dying from the poison, but slowly his friend recovers from the jaws of death by applying a self-prepared local medicine. One day, while walking outside the village, the two persons encountered a fierce dog. The narrator's friend fights with the dog, and after about 3 days later, walking on the same road, narrator is surprised to learn that the dog is dead. And the narrator learns that his friend has become a human snake, because whoever he bites will die. Whether it can be included as a science fiction or only a fantasy, Professor Amit Chen will tell me later. This story was very popular. It was written in Manipuri. People like the story very much. I am just telling the story in a very brief summary only. Another story is titled In the Realm of Nature. My story, this one. It tells the fictitious story of a cuckoo migrating from the African continent to Manipur, where cuckoos are rarely seen and heard. Whenever we see a cuckoo in Manipur, we know that the climate is changing. It is becoming warmer and warmer. I don't know whether it can be included in a science fiction story. The experts will tell us. But this story is about climate change, and all the characters in the story are personified characters like plants and animals only. Another story, one of my stories is called A New Morning. This story tells about a futuristic Imphal where computers have nearly replaced human beings. Two protagonists, one man and a woman, they travel in a car, and the car is quite automated, quite computerized. They come to know that the script they had been using, they are both writers, but the woman wants to publish her novel, but their script had been changed. The old script has become archaic and the people don't know how to write the script. Therefore, she cannot publish her novel. The script has been changed. Another new script has replaced the old one. And even the petrol pumps on the road are replaced by computers, computerized robots only. So the story tells a futuristic picture of Imphal city. Overall, I will conclude, overall science fiction writing in Manipuri literature is very, very scanty. And we understand this situation because I think our literature is very reflective of our present society. In Manipur, where poverty, insurgency are the everyday commonplace occurrence, people write about insurgency, people write about poverty, but people rarely write about science fiction. The public is also very limited. This is why I think science fiction in Manipur literature is quite scanty. But I think as time passes, there has been a new momentum. Someday this momentum will pick up, and more people will participate in the science discussions and the science fiction writing, seminars and symposiums, but the time is yet to come. With these few words, I will conclude. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rajanji. So in a language like Manipuri, अभी कई नए नवोदित कहानीकार विज्ञान गल्प की ओर, विज्ञान कथा की ओर ध्यान दे रहे हैं. ये सचमुच भारतीय भाषाओं में रचनाकार किस रूप में विज्ञान की ओर आकर्षित हो रहे हैं, नई नई रचनाएं आ रही हैं, तो ये संकेत करते हैं. अभी राजन जी ने साइंस फैंटेसी, साइंस फिक्शन, स्पेकुलेटिव फिक्शन या एपिक फैंटेसी, मिथ या मैजिक वगैरह, तो जो अलग अलग शब्द और संकल्पना है, इनके साथ हम जोड़कर इनसे अलग करके साइंस फिक्शन को हम कैसे देखते हैं, तो इस ओर हमारा ध्यान आकृष्ट किया है. मैं आगे श्री जगन्नाथ दास जी को आमंत्रित करता हूँ, जो प्रख्यात उड़िया कवि, कथाकार, आलोचक और मुख्य रूप से अनुवादक भी हैं. भारत में जो कथा साहित्य का जो विकास हुआ था, मूलतः अनुवादों से ही हुआ था. तो विज्ञान गल्प या विज्ञान कथाओं के संदर्भ में भी कई वैज्ञानिक कथाएं पाश्चात्य से इधर भारतीय भाषाओं में अनुवादित होकर आई हैं, और उड़िया को केंद्र में रखकर आशा करता हूँ जगन्नाथ दास जी आगे विज्ञान गल्प में तो जो कथा और कल्पनाएं हैं उन पर प्रकाश डालेंगे.
Warm vernal greetings to all of you. Honorable Professor Saraju, Professor Sen, and Mr. Rajan, and most importantly, my dear learned friends sitting before me. I am privileged to be here, for which I express my deep gratitude to Sahitya Academy for having invited me to be a part of this great occasion, the Festival of Letters 2026. I would like to approach this topic not merely as a literary genre, but as a powerful mode of human imagination, one that both stretches and remains anchored in the boundaries of reality. I'll be very fundamental in my speech to show how science fiction was born and how it is a hybrid genre. The word science is derived from the Greek root "scio," which means to know. Science is knowledge acquired by experimentation, observation, and inference, making it empirical. Whereas fantasy is a different thing. Fiction, by contrast, is creative imagination without a factual basis. Hence, science fiction, sci-fi in short, emerges as a hybrid genre, yoking together truth and fiction, not by violence, but by imaginative associations. Building on this union, it invites us to imagine the impossible, making it popularly known as the what-if genre. It is important, however, not to confuse science fiction, sci-fi, with fan-fi or fantasy fiction. A genre based on magic, folklore, and supernatural elements, whilst fantasy creates entirely invented worlds, sci-fi remains grounded in scientific possibilities, even if they are improbable. Thus, science fiction is based on probable improbabilities, sambhavya or sambhavana, whereas fantasy fiction relies on improbable probabilities or sambhavya sambhavana, further distinguishing the two genres. What if literature is science fiction shaped by pioneers like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne? It asks questions that reality has not yet answered. The questions are, what if men could walk on water and fly? What if machines could think and give birth to human beings? What if life exists beyond Earth? What if dead could be brought back to life? What if man could be made immortal? These questions may seem impossible at the first glance, but they are grounded in scientific curiosity and speculative reasonings. Science fiction has gradually evolved from myth and fantasy into a sophisticated genre that deeply engages with science, technology, and the future. Its origins lie in ancient imagination. Works such as the epic Gilgamesh and mythological narratives across cultures, including our Ramayana and Mahabharata, explored cosmic journeys and divine technologies. Although not scientific in intent, these stories laid the groundwork for speculative thinking. With the rise of scientific thinking inquiry in Europe, literature in the 17th and 18th century began to incorporate real scientific ideas. Johannes Kepler wrote Somnium, imagining a journey to the moon, while Jonathan Swift, in his Gulliver's Travels, included descriptions of flying islands and speculative science. As a result, this period marked the transition from mythical imagination to science-based speculation. Although sci-fi had some early beginnings, the birth of modern science fiction occurred in the 19th century with the publication of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1818, which explored the scientific creation of life and raised ethical questions. Soon after, Jules Verne wrote adventure-driven works such as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, imagining submarines and underwater exploration. Building on this foundation, H.G. Wells introduced darker and more philosophical themes in The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. During this period, science fiction became a distinct literary genre, blending imagination with scientific plausibility. In brief, mythical imagination laid the foundation of speculative thinking, which gradually developed into science-based speculation and eventually gave rise to science fiction as a distinct genre. Man's imagining activity has played a vital role throughout the ages, forming the root of literature and making the impossible seem possible. George Méliès, inspired by Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, 1865, wrote, directed, and produced a film, A Trip to the Moon, in 1902. And just 67 years later, the moon was conquered. 3 astronauts set foot on the surface of the moon for the first time in the history on the 20th July, 1969. The Apollo 11 mission commander, Mr. Armstrong, said, "That's a small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The impossible remains impossible until it is achieved. Once accomplished, imagining the impossible demonstrates its value and is celebrated as a triumph of human vision. In fact, all impossible things have been made possible only after serious and prolonged imaginings. Hence, as we see, today's imagining the impossible becomes most often than not tomorrow's truth. The Wright brothers could not have invented aeroplane if they had not immersed themselves in such prolonged and serious imaginings of the impossible. Who knows? One day, it may so happen that man wearing a space suit fitted with a powered battery and a chip can walk on water and fly. Then perhaps we will not have the necessity to book our flight tickets. I would like to allude to 2 works, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels and Professor Gokulananda Mahapatra, an Oriya scientist. Few of his writings. Mr. Mahapatra, a scientist, by profession discusses in Prithvi Bahare Maniso, Man Beyond the Earth, and Chandrar Mrutyu, the death of moon, about moon's gravity, which is 1/6 of the earth. He explains that under such gravity, a monkey jumping 5 feet on earth would jump 30 feet on moon. A paddy plant will be like a bamboo tree. And a man, if born on moon, could be 6 times taller and lighter. In Gulliver's Travel, Swift created the 6-inch tall Lilliputians and the 60-foot tall Brobdingnagians. If we compare, humans on Earth are like Lilliputians, while imagined moon dwellers under low gravity could be like the Brobdingnagians. Thus, Swift's imaginative speculation found a scientific parallel when humanity learned about the moon's gravitational force. The scientific way of looking at things, looking at matter, particularly took a Newton with Max Planck's quantum mechanics that came out in 1900. It explained the behavior of matter and energy at atomic and subatomic levels. With its advent, principles such as quantization of energy, wave-particle duality, and the uncertainty principle were introduced. They revealed a probabilistic world, they revealed a probabilistic universe rather than a deterministic one. We knew there were 3 dimensions: length, breadth, and height. With the addition of time as a dimension, the dimensions increased to 4. If we take the atomic and subatomic levels together, there will be 10 to 11 dimensions. The award-winning iconic Odia writer, Professor Shantanu Kumar Acharya, a scientist in his sci-fi Bahu Bahu Janma, I have presented a book to share. Bahu Bahu Janma, translated as Life After Lives by me, incorporates quantum mechanics in his love story of Raghunath and Sundari, the serpent, and shows how the lover brings back his beloved from the Satyaloka after journeying through different dimensions or lokas, like the Greek poet and musician Orpheus bringing back his wife Eurydice from the kingdom of death. The story, with a well-knit plot, entertains the reader, who at the same time wonders about the incorporation of scientific theory, answering the question of whether man could make interplanetary journey. I am skipping the story for the paucity of time. However, the novel Bahu Bahu Janma experiments with an entirely new literary mode. It envisions a fresh mythic narrative style born from confluence of Brahmanic metaphysics and quantum theories of modern science. The description of the hero's arduous and prolonged journey is no less dramatic and thrilling than the great sea voyage of the truth seekers like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, or Ferdinand Magellan. The same author, in his award-winning novel Narakinnara, translated by me as In Search of the Soul, has dealt with questions: what if man could be made immortal, and what if the dead could be brought back to life? The Kaviraj is in search of the Amrita Vriksha, and the hero Judge tries to give life to his rubber doll. In fine, Science fiction performs a dual function. First, it imagines the impossible worlds, technologies, and beings that do not exist at the time of imagining. Second, and more importantly, it makes the impossible conceivable. Sci-fi is not merely about technology, it is about humanity under new conditions. Science fiction serves as a warning or critic, making the impossible a mirror that reflects very real dangers, as in Orwell's 1984. Just closing. The times are changing rapidly. Nowadays, poetry matters little to the modern man because they are living in a pragmatic world. And I think for the next generation, science fiction will be the prominent literature offering entertainment and stimulating scientific curiosity and imaginative exploration of the impossible. To conclude, science fiction or imagining the impossible is not an escape from reality, but an extension of it. By imagining the impossible, it enlarges the horizon of the possible. It invites us to dream, to question, and to prepare for a future that may arrive one day, and often sooner than we expect. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a patient listening. I'm sorry I couldn't mark you when you just.
थैंक यू जगन्नाथ दास जी। जगन्नाथ दास जी ने लंबी परंपरा पर प्रकाश डाला। फिर से बातों को दोहराने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, हमें अभी 1:30 बजे तक इसको समाप्त करना है। 2-3 बातें मैं अपनी ओर से आपके सामने प्रस्तुत करना चाहता हूँ। सबसे पहले फिर एक बार मैं साहित्य अकादमी को धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ कि विज्ञान कथा को यहाँ मंच पर स्थान दिया गया है चर्चा के लिए भारतीय भाषाओं के संदर्भ में। वास्तव में भारतीय भाषाओं में ये विज्ञान गल्प या विज्ञान कथा साहित्य का जो इतिहास है बहुत लंबा नहीं है, 100-150 साल के बीच का इतिहास है। और इसमें सारी भारतीय भाषाओं में प्रयास किया गया है। तो अनुदित विज्ञान गल्प से तो ये परंपरा भारतीय भाषाओं में प्रारंभ हो जाती है, फिर धीरे धीरे मौलिक सृजन की ओर भी भारतीय गल्पकार गए। आज भी ज़्यादातर बाल या किशोर विज्ञान गल्प भारतीय भाषाओं में लिखा जा रहा है। कुछ नामोल्लेख मैं करता हूँ। तो जो भारतीय भाषाओं में अभी लिख रहे हैं मुख्य रूप से दक्षिण की भाषाओं में, क्योंकि मणिपुरी, बंगला और उड़िया भाषा से संबंधित चीज़ें सामने आई हैं। तो मराठी में हम सब जानते हैं नार्लेकर जी का नाम, उन्होंने कहानियाँ भी लिखी, उपन्यास भी लिखे। तो देशपांडे जी को भी हम सब जानते हैं। तो इधर तो हिंदी में जो प्रवृत्तियाँ विकसित हुई है, आज जिस रूप में विज्ञान गल्प का विकास हुआ है, यमुना दत्त वैष्णव जी की बात करते हैं, तो फिर संपूर्णानंद जी की बात करते हैं, कैलाश शाह की या ओम प्रकाश शर्मा जी की। तो अभी वर्तमान में माया प्रसाद त्रिपाठी, सुखदेव प्रसाद, राजेश्वर गंगावार, देवेंद्र मेवाड़ी। 80 के बाद राजीव रंजन उपाध्याय या हरीश गोयल, कल्पना कुलश्रेष्ठ, कई नाम हमें दिखाई देते हैं। और इनका ध्यान किस तरह के कद्यों के प्रति गया है, किस प्रकार के कद्य इन्होंने स्वीकार किया है। तो वैकल्पिक दुनिया, तो जो यानी इस पृथ्वी की समाप्ति पर वैकल्पिक दुनिया को कैसे ढूंढने, क्या करें, या गुरुत्वाकर्षण या विरोधी प्रभाव, या प्रकाश की गति से बहुत तेज़ संचार, या अदृश्य हो जाना, या टाइम ट्रैवल, समय की यात्रा वगैरह, तो जो मुख्य थीम्स हैं इनको लेकर बात की गई है। हम सब आज जो हैं विशेष रूप से टेक्नोलॉजी के युग में जीवन यापन कर रहे हैं, तो टेक्नोलॉजी ड्रिवन सोसाइटी के रूप में इस समाज को देख रहे हैं। टेक्नोलॉजी हमारे मन को भी प्रभावित कर रही है। बुद्धि और कृत्रिम बुद्धि की होड़ में हम आगे बढ़ते जा रहे हैं। असिमोव ने 50 के 5वें दशक में जिस प्रकार की कल्पनाएं की रोबोटिक्स या रोबोट की, आज सच होकर हमारे सामने आ रहे हैं। तो इस क्रम में अब वर्तमान नवोदित जो विज्ञान गल्पकार किस प्रकार के विषयों को लेकर लिख रहे हैं, उस पर प्रकाश डालते हुए मैं अपनी बात समाप्त करता हूँ। अब जीव विज्ञान को लेकर एक और लिखा जा रहा है, भौतिक विज्ञान को भी लेकर लिखा जा रहा है। तो ये जीन बैंक, क्लोनिंग या जेनेटिक इंजीनियरिंग, बायोटेक्नोलॉजी को लेकर एक और लिखा जा रहा है। कई उपन्यासों में हम देखते हैं सरोगेटरी मदरहुड को लेकर है, या फिर नए मानव के सृजन के लिए, एक अद्भुत मानव के सृजन की ओर तो जाने की। तो इसके अलावा भाई साहब ने भी बताया पर्यावरण और ये ट्रांसजेनेटिक बीज या ऊर्जा भंडारों का क्षरण, या कृषि में नए तकनीक लाकर ये आगे कैसे बढ़ना है, सागर संपदा को लेकर हम सोच रहे हैं, या जनसंख्या का विस्फोट है तो फिर इसका नियंत्रण कैसे करें, या न्यूक्लियर विस्फोट होने पर या परमाणुविक निरस्त्रीकरण, तो हमारे सामने आज भी वही चर्चा है जो युद्ध हो रहे हैं, या आकाश गंगा, या फिर नक्षत्र, अंतरिक्ष बस्तियाँ, अंतरिक्ष यात्राएं, या रोबोटिक्स तो है ही, तो ऊपर यानी ऊर्जायुक्त कारें, तो अलग अलग अल्टरनेटिव्स जो भी हैं कार को लेकर हम सोच रहे हैं। यहाँ एक विशेष बात के प्रति मैं आपका ध्यान आकृष्ट करना चाहता हूँ। बात यह है कि इसमें संदेह नहीं है, आविष्कारों के मूल में भविष्य दृष्टा विज्ञान रचनाकारों की कल्पना प्रेरक रही है, लेकिन विज्ञान कथा को हमें ये रोमांचकारी साहित्य की सीमाओं से बाहर ही रखना चाहिए। और वास्तव में मानव जीवन की गतिमयता या मानव जीवन में तो जो भी वैचारिक चेतना है, तो इस वैचारिक चेतना को प्रेरित करने वाली विधा के कल्पना के रूप में यहाँ ये विज्ञान कथा हमें योग देती है। तो हम सब जानते हैं कि वैज्ञानिक मानसिकता वैज्ञानिक कल्पना को जन्म देती है, लेकिन यहाँ एक बात के प्रति आप ध्यान दीजिए, ये पूरा जो विज्ञान कथा है तो ये मनुष्य को सारी सीमाओं से ऊपर उठाकर एक विश्व मानव के रूप में मनुष्य की परिणति की ओर मनुष्य को ले जाता है। एक महत्वपूर्ण बात हमें दिखाई देती है। और वैसे तो विज्ञान और टेक्नोलॉजी के अभाव में हम नागरिकता की कल्पना ही कर नहीं सकते, क्योंकि स्मार्ट सिटीज़ की बात बार बार हम करते जा रहे हैं। लेकिन समस्या ये है कि हम किस प्रकार का विकास चाहते हैं, विकास के किस मॉडल को लेकर हम आगे बढ़ना चाहते हैं। हमारी तो संस्कृति हमें उच्च स्तरीय नागरिकों के रूप में देखना चाहती है, विश्व मानव के रूप में हम बनना चाहते हैं, वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की भावना हमारी है। अब ऐसे में तो ये जो होड़ है, तो कृत्रिम बुद्धि के साथ मनुष्य का होड़ तो हमें किस ओर तो ले जाएगी, और टेक्नोलॉजी और मानव संबंध कैसे एक दूसरे को प्रभावित करेंगे, और मानव व्यवहार किस रूप में टेक्नोलॉजी से नियंत्रित होता जाएगा। तो क्या मानव से भी बाहर जाकर टेक्नोलॉजी या जो भी रोबोटिक्स को लेकर कई उपन्यास वगैरह लिखे गए हैं जिसमें रोबोट मनुष्य को यानी नियंत्रित करने की चेष्टा करता रहता है, वहाँ तक बात चली गई है। ऐसे में असंभव को संभव बनाना ठीक है, तो क्योंकि हमारे विश्वास भी बदलते हैं, हमारी वास्तविकताएं बदलती हैं, हम जिसको यथार्थ मानकर चलते हैं उस यथार्थ को भी एक नया रूप मिलता है। तो जेम्स वेब टेलीस्कोप के आविष्कार के बाद बहुत सारी नई सूचनाएं हमारे पास आई हैं। हमारे इसके पहले की जो भी हमारी धारणाएं थी अब बदलने लगी हैं, हमारी सोच का विस्तार हो रहा है। कुल मिलाकर विज्ञान कथा जो है हमें हमारे अपने भविष्य को वर्तमान में लाने की चेष्टा कर रहा है। आगे भी भारत इसमें अपनी गुरुता और महानता को साबित करेगी और आगे बढ़ने की चेष्टा करेगी, क्योंकि भारतीय संस्कृति में ये यानी बात पहले से ही बनी हुई है, क्योंकि विज्ञान भी संस्कृति से ही प्रेरित होकर आगे विकसित होती है। तो कई बार हम संस्कृति के विरोधी तत्व के रूप में विज्ञान को देखते हैं, जबकि ये सही नहीं है। संस्कृति ही तो विज्ञान को यानी रूपायित करने या हमारे सामने आविष्कार करने के लिए तो ले जाती है। हमारी संस्कृति वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की बात की जाती है और विश्व मानव की चिंता यहाँ बार बार विज्ञान गल्प में प्रकट की जाती है। तो अब भाई साहब भी बोल रहे थे, मानव अस्तित्व संकट में पड़ जाता है तो हमें कैसे आगे जाना चाहिए, प्रकृति और पर्यावरण के साथ मिलकर हमें कैसे जीना चाहिए, इस प्रकार की बातें। तो मैं समझता हूँ कि जो सब प्रपत्र हमारे सामने है, जो विचार सामने आए हैं, बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विचार हैं। मैं भी कभी कभी नवोदित रचनाकारों के सामने विज्ञान गल्प और विज्ञान कथा के बारे में बातें करता रहता हूँ। तो इस बार ये मौका आप सबके सामने मिला है, तो समय पर मैं समाप्त कर रहा हूँ। 1:30 बजे बिल्कुल ठीक है। तो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद अकादमी को और अकादमी के सहयोग। धन्यवाद।
खैर, हमको ये तो समझ में आया इस आज की परिचर्चा से कि शुरुआत कल्पना से होती है, फिर उसके परे उसके और परे जाया जा सकता है। इस परिचर्चा के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। बहुत कुछ सोचने को मिला, बहुत कुछ आगे जो लोग लिखेंगे उनके लिए नए रास्ते खुलेंगे। एंड आई डू होप दैट साइंस फिक्शन मूव्स from being for children and the youth to being for everyone. We'd like to thank Shri R.S. Saraju ji, जिन्होंने इतनी सुंदरता से इस परिचर्चा को मॉडरेट किया। श्री अमृत सेन, श्री मोइरंगथिम राजन जी and Shri Jagannath Das ji, thank you very much for this wonderful panel discussion. If you come forward, we'll take a picture now. Thank you.